What's going on, my creative collective? Welcome to lesson number 35 for A Course in Creativity, Coloring Outside of Conceptual Lines. So this is inspired by A Course in Miracles of the same number, the lesson workbook, number 35. And that lesson is, my mind is part of God's, I am very holy. Now, again, I interchange spirit with God. For me, that feels a lot better. So my mind is part of spirits. I am very holy. When I think about this lesson, what comes to mind, creatively speaking, is where we are placed. So this is not just our context, but this is also where we place ourselves within the realms of our own lives, with beliefs, how we place ourselves around us, but then how we operate within a tighter energy within ourselves. So when it comes to holiness, we're often taught, this is kind of where some religious templating comes in, right? We are often taught to conceive of holiness in terms of something outside of us. So seek it outside of yourself. Go here, do this behavior, and it will all bridge the gap because it's outside of you somewhere. But it's inside of you. It's inside of you. There's very little outside of you that you need to seek for. Again, don't tell my bookshelf that. I try to whisper when I do these things because they'll be, no kidding. But, right, there's very little, right? I'm hungry for knowledge and I'm so curious about the world around me. But I understand that there's something fundamental that exists inside of me that is a truth that is holy, that is sacred, that cannot be obtained from something outside. That's the basis of my spiritual foundation. So when we think about this, one thing that I think of is the way that we almost have holiness on a spectrum when we're kind of anchored in that religious templating, right? We are holy, Holy, so holy or not. And then there's a series of behaviors and things that we place on this spectrum, and all it does is really serve to separate us and to further anchor us in this idea that we are not sacred, we are not holy, we are not connected, we are not together, we are not at one with the energy that brought us here, that it sustains us, of which we are fundamentally a part. This spectrum disconnects us. And this spectrum also makes it so that it's a discursive trick where we have to look outside of ourselves to see the spectrum, to assess where we are, to assess how our behaviors and our lives are in accord with that spectrum, right? Now, this isn't to say, don't take responsibility for things, don't be accountable to your life, no, that's not what this is about, right? That's not what this is about. This is looking at the fact that these kinds of structures can push us to look outside of ourselves for something that can really only ever come from within. Right? When you sink into the present moment, when you sink into present moment awareness, that's a from within thing. That can only come from in here. Because when you're seeking, you're outside of the present moment. When you're seeking, you're outside of yourself. When you're seeking, when you're in that answer mode. And again, I do this a lot. I love research. I'm super curious. But I understand that what that can do is separate me from my source. That can separate me from spirit. If I stay in that place and believe in or buy into this spectrum. Now, what I'm inviting you to do here with this particular lesson, Coloring Outside the Lines, is to take a step back and see the ways that you've done this, right? See the ways that you've gauged yourself as closer to holiness or not. And the reason why this spectrum is also important is because this is where we end up giving our power away. We give it away to different, systems, beliefs, structures, what have you. We end up giving it away in this search for that one end of the spectrum that is somehow more sacred, more holy, more appropriate, more acceptable than the other. So we create haves and have-nots. And we know that this also can create power struggles and dynamics that do not serve the collective, that do not serve everybody, that in fact anchor and reinforce the absence of people within circles that we make, right? Within these circles. And I think of, humanity as one big circle. So when people are outside of that, when people are denied their humanity because of these things, it's not the problem of the people in the circle, especially if, again, this isn't thinking about big picture morality here. I'm just looking at who's involved and who is allowed in the circle and who is not by definitions that the spectrum creates, right? So most holy and not. So who is not allowed in, right? And that's where that spectrum can come into play. I liken it back to a lot of experiences that I had coming out within and then busting out of the church, right? So for me, it was about understanding and seeing that there's nothing that's really changed in doctrines or teachings in churches, but I'm more in those circles if I wanted to be. So time has changed, but the teachings have not. The people administering the teachings have changed, but the teachings have not necessarily, right? So it's about the context and the self-concept and where we are in placing ourselves. So this spectrum I find to be a really interesting tool to think with, right? We talked about thinking with. So think with this tool, be with this tool, make with this idea of the ways that we place and create, we place things on spectrums and create with them. Because when we're creating from that place of spectrum ideas, right? And this isn't a spectrum of, a variety of things. This is a spectrum that is used to anchor a binary of this is the truth and this is not. And everything else in between is assessed based on whether it aligns to this goalpost or this goalpost. So it's not necessarily a spectrum that widens the variety of things. This is a spectrum that sort of reinforces and anchors the idea of rightness and wrongness. So when it comes to our holiness and how we construct this, everything in between those two posts becomes what we use to justify our separation. And then we use that as well to look at other people and judge them and separate ourselves from them based on how we feel that they're adhering to a goalpost that we've placed outside of ourselves. So if that goalpost is outside of ourselves, how the heck can we ever measure up to it if we believe that it's fundamentally outside of us? Unless it's a part of you, how are you supposed to, reach that point? And you'll often find that it's a source of separation, not because of the way that, not because of the stuff of which we are made. It's because of the way that we are translating it into our experience, into our human experience right now. Coloring outside of conceptual lines is vital, especially with creativity. It's not just creativity alone, but this is tapping into your creative power, because if you're creating from this place, you are literally at the level of thought, constructing an idea of something sacred that does not, it is a definition of sacredness that does not include you. It does not include you. And if it doesn't include you, how can it include anyone else? Because you're all made of the same stuff, right? We're all made of the same stuff. So if your idea of holiness does not include you, then how can it possibly include other people? So it limits us, this idea of binary thinking. When we operate from that place, either or, we need to move into a place of both and that does not rely on spectrums to play out the nuances or to lay out the nuances. This relies on us thinking beyond spectrum. This particular lesson is a great way to explore this for ourselves. So, when I think about holiness, I think about what about wholeness? WHOLENESS, wholeness, right? The holiness. What about holiness as in complete? You have it in you. You are complete. You are whole as you are without anything else. Again, don't tell my books that, right? You are whole and complete just as you are. This takes it beyond just an affirmation and something that you can really sit with. When you're whole and complete on your own, the present moment isn't just a place that you go to escape. The present moment is a place that you sink into to understand yourself better. This is what meditation can become. Meditation isn't just a way that we quiet the mind to access something else. When we are coming from this place of understanding our own wholeness, our own holiness, then we start to realize that meditation is a way for us to remember that. It is a remembering ourselves home activity that we do to access that wholeness, to remember how connected we are. Mindfulness is very useful. This isn't to malign the ways that people use meditation. I'm not judging. I'm saying, though, that we can use meditation as a way to separate us if we haven't addressed that spectrum, if we haven't addressed that original templating from which we create the world around us. And even when we think artistically, we will create things, we will create from that place, and it will be within this very, very small box from within which we create, because we are limiting ourselves because we think, well, that's always been done, so then I need to do it this way. That's the way that's a best practice, so we need to adhere to that specific thing. I'm all for best practices because you know what? When it comes to YouTube, some of the stuff that I've picked up on my own from research and being very curious does work. There are other things, though, that allow us, once we move out of it, we can start to really innovate. And this isn't about upholding innovation as the thing, because again, that's an attachment. So that's not it either. This is really looking at how when we operate from within specific boxes, it limits our ability to take in the world around us and also to shine our light in it. This is like trying to smash a round peg into a square hole. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. Because we didn't come here to I believe at least that we didn't come here to experience ourselves as just fitting in the molds perfectly. We came here to experience ourselves as creators, as creative, right? To partake in the act of creation. We are inherently creative. Everything that we do every day, every thought that we have is an act of creation, right? The things that we do out in the world are acts of creation. So I firmly believe that we were brought here to do that. So when we're sticking to this idea of, this is holy and this is not, then we can bind ourselves spiritually to and with cords that are not our own, right? And it can really do harm, because when it comes to, it's not just about thinking outside the box, but when it comes to that kind of thought process, we forget that we too are made of the thing that we are seeking. We are made of the thing that we're seeking, okay? So if we're made of the thing that we're seeking, that means that we're whole. That means that we're whole. So when you have this awareness, and when it just drops in, if that happens today or at another time, or it's happened before, amazing. One of the things that I will recommend is to just breathe for a second. Just feel where you are. Put your hands on the desk where you're sitting. Put your hands on your knee, right? Put your hands on something to feel where you are. Ground it, okay? And just breathe the tension out of your body that you've been holding in there through these spectrums of binaried thinking, right? Because I'm neurodivergent, one of the things I wanted to look at with a PhD potentially, which was neuronormative constructions of reality. And what that means is it's along these lines, these discursive binaries that we've used to create the world around us, okay, and how that limits our capacity for the conceptualization of anything outside of these norms. Obviously, that's probably, I keep my Captain Obvious cape in that closet, So, but when we think within these neuronorms, when we think inside of these, binaried ways of thinking, we don't really allow ourselves to fit into them. We don't allow ourselves to fit onto the spectrums through which we measure good or bad or right or wrong or whatever those metrics are. The spectrums that we use to judge ourselves, right? The spectrums we use to judge ourselves are the ways that we disconnect ourselves because we attach something to them. We attach some kind of light that is within us, but that we ignore. We ignore it because we've put it somewhere outside of us. So when we do that, how can we possibly know that we're worthy, right? If holiness is outside of you, okay? If holiness is outside of you, then you are never going to be part of that. You will spend a lifetime striving. You will spend a lifetime working towards that. And, there are certain pursuits that are absolutely worth putting in the work for. But when it comes to knowing your holiness in terms of your value and your worth, you'll never reach it if it's outside of you. You'll never reach it. And so many things teach this too. So many things teach this, not just in terms of religion, but also in terms of a lot of self-help movements, right? And this isn't to malign self-help, because trust me, coming from a tumultuous childhood like I did, those books they parented me, right? I dove into them, and that's how I helped myself. So this isn't to malign them. This is to say that some of them will have you spinning your wheels forever so that you never get a grip on your own worthiness and deserving, because every single book advertises some other way of doing things that if you get caught up in that without understanding your fundamental worthiness first, you will then be in a state of disconnect with yourself and other people around you beyond just this basic idea of oneness. So this isn't just about worthiness too. This is about deserving. Like, if you feel that you deserve to constantly be searching for meaning, if you feel that you deserve to constantly be in pursuit of some kind of holiness or sacredness outside of you because you can't fathom that it's within you, then your life will never really take on that sweetness or wholeness. Because when you realize that the call is coming from inside the house, as it were, then what ends up happening is you begin to understand that you have more creative power than you might think. You have more creative power than you may have lent yourself in general, right? So this isn't just about thinking thoughts that feel good. It's not just about that. This is about reaching the present moment with an awareness that the thing that you're seeking is probably somewhere within you, and that's where the resonance is happening. Good or bad, right? Good or bad. There's a resonance there, and it's like the tuning forks. When you tap one and it's at the same frequency, the other one buzzes, even if they're not touching, but if they're close, right? So that's where it's like you're aligning with specific things, and the creative power here is: do you want to? Do you want those things? Do you want that? Because if you don't, the creative power is saying, well, actually, maybe my holiness is inside, and maybe there's another way to do this. Maybe I don't need this idea of either or. Maybe there's a both and here that I'm not seeing. Maybe there's a both and that I can open up to. So your creative spark for today is just to observe yourself in a day, just to observe yourself and to think about the ways that you behave or the things that you do, and whether you're doing them because they are an intentional choice that you are making, or because they are the product of your pursuit of a holiness or wholeness that is outside of you, that you have placed in that position, but that is actually within you. And just ask yourself, am I doing this thing because I am doing it with intention, and this is a choice that I am making? This is about choosing, right? A lot of the course in creativity, I wanted to build it around the idea of choice and remembering that we have one. We have one at all times. We don't have to make perfect choices. That's not the point here. We're going to make messy choices. My cat's joining the party. We're going to make messy choices, right? We're going to make choices that, we look back on and go, ooh, cringe, right? That's the point of being human. It's not to get it perfect. It's just to be conscious of the choices that we have, and to be aware that we can make choices and that we can live with a conscious intention, and we don't have to just absorb everything that's around us because it's been called important by different systems or people or teachings that we come across. So this is really about getting into the place of conscious choosing. And honestly, you can really do that from the present moment. That's one of the places that you can do that from. In fact, it's one of the only places where you have that awareness of yourself. So that it's not just about being present for mindfulness purposes or meditative purposes, but you can be aware of yourself too. Because when you're aware of yourself, you'll then see, am I slipping into this goalpost like spectrum either or thinking? Am I doing that? Am I sitting in that energy? Right? Because then you're also going to attract situations, because they're the ones you'll look for, cognitive bias, right? You will look for ones that reinforce that way of thinking because you're not thinking of anything outside of it. So that will act to anchor and reinforce where you are, what you're thinking, all of your beliefs. And I'm not saying let's throw the whole thing out. Let's, reshape our whole system. I mean, that's not healthy either, right? That's not healthy either. So we need to really think about where it is that we're sitting. And that's really just the creative spark, is just to bring an awareness to yourself today, right? It's not doing anything, because I feel like if it were to be an activity, it would be pulling you outside of yourself. The point of this spark is to pull you back in and just to sit with yourself and to be embodied, right? We often place the pursuit of spirituality as so high and elevated, but we forget, that part of that equation, spiritual beings having a human experience. We're having a human experience. So because that's the case, we need to be embodied and be comfortable with being in our bodies. Today's creative spark is really just to be with yourself, and befriend where you are. We will probably revisit, things like this throughout this course in creativity, because it is something that needs to be reinforced, because we can't just do it once and then we're one and done, right? How many times in my life have I thought that, eating well and getting exercise and all of that stuff was just like a one and done thing. Put it on your calendar once. Congratulations, you went for a big run. You are good. It's not how it works. So this is lesson 35 for A Course in Creativity, coloring outside of conceptual lines. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If this resonated, please like and subscribe. I'd love to have you on the channel. And for those watching, thank you so much. I'm very grateful for your energy and your time here. So thank you so very much for that. I really appreciate it. I'm very grateful. So there are other ways you can connect on the channel, so check that out if you want. But if this is where we part, I hope that wherever this finds you on the time-space continuum, morning, afternoon, or night, it finds you very, very well, my friends. Take care.